Hey everybody! Recently, we got a look at the Scout's newest weapon. Well, actually, we got a lot more than that. We finally got a look at all of the different mods and overclocks. So today, we're going to take a look at them, and I'll use my big, giant gigabrain to theorize some possible loadouts. Now keep in mind that any or all of the overclocks and mods could be changed at some point in the future. But let's just use what we've got for right now and see what we can come up with. Before we begin, don't forget to leave a comment if you think there's something the developer should change, or if you have your own idea for a build. And while you're down there, maybe you should subscribe or something? I plan to talk about the rest of the weapons once they reveal their mods and overclocks, so if you want to see that, it might be worth sticking around. Anyways, enough about all that. It's time we get into the mods. So I'm going to read out all the different mods, give you a very short, concise summary of what they do, and some of my quick thoughts on them. Then I'll discuss how all the mods might work together, and what overclocks would work best with what builds. Let's start off by looking at Tier 1. First off, we've got High Volume Plasma Feed. This gives the weapon a faster rate of fire. It seems like a good choice if you're aiming for a more aggressive build that will take advantage of overheating. Then there's Improved Thermals, which makes the gun generate less heat per shot. It looks like it's meant for builds that want you to shoot for a longer period of time. It might work well for a damage build. Last mod for Tier 1 is Stronger Particle Accelerator. This makes the projectiles move faster. This seems like it could make it easier to deal with bugs at a longer range. Now let's take a look at Tier 2. Here we've got Larger Battery, which gives you a higher ammo count. A classic upgrade that will keep you in the fight longer. If you take High Volume Plasma Feed, you're probably going to want to take this. You could also choose Increased Particle Density. This is an increase to damage. Pretty straightforward. Looks like it'll work well with either Improved Thermals or Stronger Particle Accelerator. Now let's take a look at Tier 3. We've got Custom Coil Alignment. This lowers the projectile spread. It seems like this would be good for long-range builds. This would probably work really well with the Stronger Particle Accelerator upgrade. Next is the Gen 2 Cooling System. Heat decreases faster when you're not firing. If you're looking to avoid overheating, then this seems to be the best choice. Last for Tier 3 is Hot Feet. This makes you move faster while the weapon is overheating. This seems like a pretty good contrast to the cooling system upgrade. It seems like the overheat build is coming together. Let's see what Tier 4 has in store for us. Looks like what's up first is PCF. This gives the gun a chance to electrocute. It seems like this mod is a bit of an odd man out. You probably want more ammo and a faster rate of fire for a higher chance of electrocuting your targets. We've also got Plasma Splash. This reduces damage but adds an AoE effect. Good if you want more crowd control. This seems like an all-around decent upgrade, especially considering how lacking Scout is in AoE. Then we've got Destructive Resonance AMP. It gives the gun a higher chance to break armor. This could be good if you're focusing on a single target damage build. Both this and Plasma Splash could work pretty well on most builds. And finally, we have Tier 5. Here we've got Manual Heat Dump. Pressing reload will force the gun to overheat. It seems good if you want to avoid overheating in a bad spot. This might be really good for overheat builds since it lets you control when and where you overheat, but it also could be pretty good for builds that want you to keep your cool. Then there's Thermal Feedback Loop. Having the heat meter above 50% increases your fire rate. This is good for heat-focused builds. If you want to constantly be in the action, then this will be a good choice. Well, we've got all the mods covered, now it's time to take a look at some overclocks. Let's look at all the different categories of overclocks, starting with Clean. Thermal Liquid Coolant is the first one, and it gives you a better cooling rate and less heat generated per shot. This looks great for staying in the fight longer than usual. There's also Impact Deflection. This makes your projectiles bounce. It sounds like it might be a lot of fun, a straightforward upgrade that adds a new feature to your projectile. I see very little downside for this. Those were pretty straightforward, but now we're getting into the balanced overclocks, which are starting to get a bit more complicated. Rewiring mod is the first one, and also, I think the most interesting of this category. It makes it so that the cooldown after overheating your gun gives you ammo, but it also reduces your total ammo count heavily. This could work great with the Manual Heat Dump mod, possibly giving you infinite ammo. Until we know exactly how this works though, I can't say for certain how good it is. We also have Aggressive Venting. This makes it so that overheating your gun will burn bugs in the area around you, plus you can recover from overheating faster. You'll also get less ammo and slower cooling, however. This seems perfect for an AoE build. Scout could really use something like this. Choosing this and Plasma Splash might be a great idea. Next we're going to be taking a look at the riskier, but also more rewarding choices for overclocks. Unstable. Let's start off with Overtuned Particle Accelerator. This gives you a massive damage boost, but a higher spread, heat buildup, and less ammo. If you're looking to shred bugs with a build that isn't all that concerned with heat buildup, then this may be for you. Then there's Shield Battery Booster, which is another overclock I find to be really interesting. When your shields are full, damage and projectile speed are higher. However, this comes with a pretty big downside. Your shields get removed when you overheat, and your overall ammo count is reduced. You're going to have to strike a very careful balance with this one. Manual heat dump is pretty useless on this, so you might as well try and go for a build that can cool quickly but stay hot for a while. And the final overclock, Thermal Exhaust Feedback. It gives you 5 fire damage for every 10 heat generated over 50% of heat capacity. It comes with a downside of making normal shots generate more heat and overheat lasting even longer. This one's a bit more complicated, but it seems like the main goal of this overclock is keeping your gun in the red. Overheat will be more punishing, but it looks like it can add a lot of damage if you want to take that risk. Well, we finally covered everything we need to. Now let's start talking about some possible builds. Taking a step back and looking at all these mods and overclocks together, I've noticed 2 main categories of builds. Builds that focus on taking out bugs at a range, and builds that focus in on getting up close and personal. And this makes a lot of sense because that's actually the pattern that both of the other scout weapons tend to follow. So I think that when creating a build for this weapon, you're going to want to pick one of those 2 major categories to go into. Of course, there is some flexibility in this, so you're not locked into one or the other. But I like to see that as the 2 of the first choices you're going to make. If you go with a long range build, you're probably going to want stronger particle accelerator so you can hit bugs that are at a distance quicker. Follow that up with custom coil alignment so that you have a lower projectile spread and you'll be more accurate over a long range. Those 2 seem like the only mandatory ones for a long range build. There's plenty of room for variety among the other mods that you'll choose. As for overclocks, I think that Shield Battery Booster and Thermal Exhaust Feedback will work best for long range. With Shield Battery Booster, the projectile speed is going to be increased, so that makes it even easier to hit bugs at a longer range. Not only that, but you don't need to worry as much if your shield gets taken down, since you will ideally be far away from the bugs. Thermal Exhaust Feedback is great because not only do you get bonus fire damage, but if you do end up overheating, you should be in an ideal position to stay away from the swarm. Now on the other hand, if you're looking for a more up-close and personal type of build, then there are a couple of mods that you can choose from. Getting high volume plasma feed for the faster fire rate might be a good way to deal with bugs that have gotten a little too close for comfort. Plasma Splash might also be a more useful mod for this build rather than the range build, because you're probably going to have more groups of bugs that have swarmed closer together right near you. Thermal Feedback Loop might also be useful for the same reason that high volume plasma feed is. Of course, with Thermal Feedback Loop, you're probably going to want a heat focused build, so that's important to keep in mind. For these kinds of builds, I think that Aggressive Venting and Overtuned Particle Accelerator would be best. Aggressive Venting is great if you've gotten yourself in just a little bit too deep and you need to get some space. With Overtuned Particle Accelerator, you're going to be making use of that massive damage boost, and the higher spread isn't going to matter all that much so long as you stay right up in your enemy's face. Of course, whether you fight your enemies up close or far away isn't the only decision you're going to have to make. You're going to have to choose if you want to play offensively or defensively, and this weapon gives you a lot of different options in that regard. If you're going for an offensive build, increased particle density is a pretty good mod to choose. More damage is always a great choice for an offensive build, and speaking of which, I think to overcharge PCF might actually work best for a build like this. Sure, it can work on defensive builds as well, but if you're going for outright damage, then I think adding this on is the perfect choice. As for defensive builds, I think the Gen 2 cooling system might be best. It seems to work well with a more cautious build. The same goes for the manual heat dump, allowing you to always be ready to respond to any challenges that might pop up. Now, I've been speaking pretty generally about the different builds I'm thinking of, but the reason for that is I want to give you guys an overview of what I think this gun can do, and what my thought process is while going in and creating specific builds. So now let me give you 2 specific builds that I think are going to be really good. I'm not going to read out the name of every single upgrade again, because you've heard them a dozen times at this point, so I'll highlight on screen what exactly I'm talking about. So the first build I think might be interesting is Tier 1A, Tier 2A, Tier 3C, Tier 4B, Tier 5B, and the Aggressive Venting or the Thermal Exhaust Feedback Overclock. I made a video about a gunner build a while back that focused on overheating and heat mechanics, and I really enjoyed that, and hopefully this is something similar but really different. Essentially, the build is going to focus on overheating and doing tons of splash damage, and I'm really curious to see what splash damage on Scout looks like. Another build I've thought of is Tier 1C, Tier 2B, Tier 3A, Tier 4A, and Tier 5A, with the Shield Battery Booster Overclock. This is essentially a long-range defensive build. With Shield Battery Booster as an overclock, it's going to be focused on doing tons of damage at a comfortable distance. I also threw Overcharge PCF in there for the chance at electricity because I thought it was interesting and I want to try that out. And those are the builds I've thought of so far. Of course, there are plenty more, but I kind of wanted to give you guys a chance to go out and talk about them. So what do you think? What builds have you come up with? Because seriously, I want to know. I want to improve on these builds and I want to be a master before these weapons even come out. So let me know in the comments below, and as I said before, make sure to like and subscribe to get more content. I'm going to talk about these new weapons and we're going to work together to come up with the meta strategies before we even get to touch them. I'll see you guys then.